And a special thank you to Chris Emmanuel for pointing out that I didn't have to use those stairs. That was my biggest worry. Thank you to everybody for the introductions and for being here today. And I'm really, really honored to be a part of this 2022 celebration of women. My congratulations to the incredible group of women who have been nominated for this award. If I may, I would like to begin by asking you some questions. If you have ever lost someone you truly love, ever struggled through divorce or relationship breakup, please raise your hand and keep it raised. If you have ever been bullied, lost your job, lost your business, lost your home, or experienced discrimination, please raise your hand. If you have ever experienced a miscarriage, an abortion, or struggled through infertility, please raise your hand and let's keep those hands raised. If you or anyone you love has had to cope with mental illness, dementia, or a life-altering physical impairment, please raise your hand. And finally, if you have ever lived through a pandemic, please raise your hand. Now, I would like you to take a look around you, and as you can see, we are surrounded by loss. Please put your hands down if you haven't already done so, and thank you for your honesty. At any given moment, there will be someone in your life who is struggling with loss. It's part of life, and it does not discriminate. Whatever your race, culture, background, gender, sexual orientation, education, or level of income, you will face adversity in the form of loss and grief at some point in your life. For me, the defining moment came in 2006, when my husband Mark was diagnosed with leukemia. Before we even had time to process this devastating news, he became an inpatient at Princess Margaret Hospital, starting a 30-day induction protocol. The only thing I could be sure of at this point was that I didn't know what I didn't know. I wanted to focus on him, but our two young kids needed me too. Mark went into hospital in the summer and came home in the fall to begin months and months of relentless treatment. The daily grind of medications and appointment waiting rooms soon became a blur, and my frustration and anxiety threatened to eat me alive. I had to do something with all this nervous energy. I needed to somehow find something good that would help me to make sense of a painful situation. One early morning, while driving down to the hospital in Toronto, I had a moment of clarity. I decided to try and create something which would honor Mark's journey and give both of us something positive to focus on. This moment evolved into the Mad Hatter's Walk for Leukemia Research. Not only did it give me something to focus on, it also gave my husband a much-needed project to distract him from the discomfort and indignities of chemotherapy and radiation. I had very little experience of planning and coordinating big public events, but I soon discovered that passion and determination together create a superpower. With lots and lots of work and huge support from our incredible Newmarket community, the first annual Mad Hatter's Walk became a reality in May 2007, 10 months after Mark's diagnosis. Over 3 consecutive years, we were able to raise an incredible $120,000 for leukemia research. It also reinforced our sense of community and gratitude for a town where we had only lived for a few years. Remission came and went. and in the fall of 2010, Mark relapsed. This called for a different protocol, which included 3 chemo injections into the spine. Sadly, Mark reacted to the drug immediately after the final injection, and it caused him severe brain damage. As a result of this, he became unable to speak, walk, or even feed himself. He was soon taken off the bone marrow donor list since he was not in a fit state to receive one, even if a donor could be found. He was transferred back up to Southlake, where the wonderful physio team did their very best to teach him to walk again. But any progress never lasted. I brought him home in time for Christmas that year and hired a nurse to tag team with me as he needed 24-hour care. Since he was now confined to a wheelchair and a hospital bed, our world shrank. Our kids, now 7 and 8, took it in their stride, as kids often do, and just accepted that Daddy needed a lot of help now. In the middle of June 2011, I received a phone call and was told that the cancer was back. Nothing else could be done, and Mark would most likely die within 3 weeks. It was my job to tell him, our children, and the rest of the family. This was naturally very hard, but I was learning that I could do hard things. 3 weeks turned out to be only 12 days, and my wonderful parents and twin sister flew here from Scotland to support me through it. Although Mark wanted to die at home, when the end came near, I couldn't go through with it. He was not conscious, and I was scared of how it might look at the very end. I was worried that our children's lasting memory of their dad might be an ugly or traumatic one. I felt very unprepared for what might happen. And looking back, I wish I had had an end-of-life doula by my side to offer comfort, knowledge, and support. I was also afraid that he might die and emerge and be surrounded by strangers. So I looked up hospice near me and got through to Hill House in Richmond Hill late that evening. Astonishingly, they had 1 bedroom available, and they sent an ambulance immediately. That turned out to be his last night, and he died the following afternoon in the safety and peaceful surroundings of Hill House. I was with him when his heart stopped beating, and I remember the feeling of disbelief. I was also breathtakingly grateful for the fact that I could spend Mark's last moments with him in such a warm and peaceful environment. I wondered if, had life turned out differently, if I could have found work and meaning in such a place. In the meantime, I needed to get back on my feet and figure out the single parenting thing. My father died 14 months later, so both my mom and I were learning how to be widows at the same time. I returned to teaching and enjoyed the familiarity and the energy of working with children. My teaching career had been enjoyable and satisfying for many years, and it had enabled me to work all over the world before I had my own kids. But something had changed in me when my husband died. I was just so busy surviving that I didn't even realize it until years later. I didn't forget about my dream to work with grieving individuals and their families, though, and a chance encounter led me to becoming a hospice volunteer at the recently opened Margaret Bayon Hospice here in Newmarket. Spending time with hospice families reminded me why I had been drawn to that work. It made me realize that something had been missing in my life for a long time, and that was a sense of meaning. Being with families whose loved one was dying actually gave me a sense of value and purpose that I didn't even know had been missing. I remained open to the idea of having love in my life, and 8 years after Mark died, I married a wonderful man. He's right there. Also Mark. Oh, but wait, our wedding party included our 5 grown children, including 2 Olivers. Yeah, I have one and he has one. And so began yet another new chapter. 8 months after our beautiful cottage wedding, we went into the first pandemic lockdown. Teaching changed forever, and I began to seriously question my priorities and values. Like most of my colleagues, for a while I just rolled with the punches, learned how to teach remotely, and endured the daily headaches of being dependent on technology. I knew I needed to find the sense of purpose that I was missing, and I wanted to explore my options. While I was still teaching full-time, I stumbled across the role of an end-of-life doula, and I was intrigued. My hospice work was rewarding, but I knew I had more to offer. The role of a death doula or end-of-life doula has been around for centuries, but the term is relatively new. Just as a birth doula coaches and supports a mother and family through the birthing process, a death doula does likewise at the other end of life. When I looked into the course content to earn certification, it seemed to be exactly what I was looking for. As I started my training and connecting with other like-minded people, I was reminded of that expression. You don't know what you don't know. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. I decided to take a huge and impulsive leap of faith and register myself as a business, even before my initial training was finished. Nobody had less of an idea how to start a business than I did. I had no idea. However, I was able to tap into my superpower, aka passion and commitment, and I searched for the right people to get me started. Our local small business center, and in fact Vivian, who we just saw, was instrumental in guiding me through the red tape of obtaining a business number, license, etc. I remember thinking, okay, what do I need next? I know, business cards. With some help from Vistaprint, I designed my first box of 200 business cards, and suddenly I felt real. Let me give you a tip. For any other budding entrepreneurs out there, please do not waste your money ordering business cards in the first week. You won't like them in the second week. So what was my greatest barrier to starting my practice, other than an unhealthy obsession with stationery? I discovered that the greatest barrier to doing this work and helping people through the process is the word itself. As a society, we are very uncomfortable talking about death, let alone planning for it, even though it is as natural as life itself. There are many who think it is bad luck, morbid, or plain bad manners to say the word, let alone discuss it. This reluctance can be identified all across many cultures. And in 1970, John Underwood from England created the Death Cafe movement to try and open up that conversation. One of my favorite quotes of his is, "Just as talking about sex won't make you pregnant, so talking about death won't make you dead." In the spirit of providing a safe space for having these conversations, some doulas, death doulas, including myself, host these free events for anyone who has questions which they're too afraid to ask. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but being able to ask questions and share opinions in a non-judgmental space is a good start. Family discussions around this topic rarely seem to happen. So end-of-life planning and support was the area I initially intended to specialize in. But there is still so much reluctance to even acknowledge this momentous event that I realized it may take much longer than I anticipated to serve in the role of a death doula. Meanwhile, I decided to focus on expanding my expertise in the area of grief. Grief is, after all, a common thread which unites us all. When someone or something is taken from us, we experience a grief response. We don't get to decide how we will feel or how long it will last. There is no rule book and no precedent for us to follow. Mourning, which is the outward display of grief, often involves rituals and patterns of social behaviors. But grieving itself is a unique and personal process. Why then is our society so ill-equipped to support people in grief? The truth is, grief is often ugly and painful to witness. It is an unwelcome guest at any gathering. Social norms include phrases such as, "My condolences on your loss," "I'm sorry for your loss," "At least they're in a better place," "At least they didn't suffer," "At least." None of these expressions makes the grieving person feel heard or supported. Their main job seems to be to make the well-meaning friend feel better. The words "at least" have no place here. What they do is actually diminish the pain of the grieving person. If you don't know what to say, I recommend you say exactly that. Let your friend know that you are here to support them, but try to avoid platitudes and attempts to bright side the situation. They need to feel heard and have their pain validated, period. If you have grieving children in your life, they need to feel heard too. Too often, adults try to protect them from the truth. But if we are not honest with them, then we risk losing their trust. By telling them stories, we just end up confusing them. Many kids instinctively know when they're being lied to, and then they make up their own explanations using their own fertile imaginations. Children are generally curious about facts, and they can usually handle more than we think. As long as the message is delivered kindly and we encourage them to ask questions, having open and honest dialogues will help you and them in the end. Since grief is not an emotion, but rather a whole body response to the pain of loss, anything we feel during the grieving process is valid and needs to be normalized. The truth is, we really don't know what we don't know. And I had no idea there were so many different types of grief. I learned about anticipatory grief, ambiguous grief, traumatic grief, disenfranchised grief, collective grief, cumulative grief, and complicated grief. Each label applies to an individual's grieving process, the event that triggered it, and society's response to it. The labels simply help us to understand the complexities of grief, and they can help us to support people more effectively. It is also part of the human condition. Sometimes it seems like we are surrounded by it, and the ongoing pandemic has only intensified this. For 2 years, we have been experiencing collective grief as a result of loss of freedom and personal connections. This has been compounded by many personal losses, which have been made even worse by the inability for the bereaved to be present with their loved one or to participate in the rituals of their culture. So while I love my role as a volunteer bedside companion for the residents of Margaret Bay and Hospice, I find myself working in the area of grief support and education much more than end of life. Am I okay with that? Absolutely. I believe that I can make a difference in both roles, and that grief and death are both just part of life. So why did I not make this change earlier? To be honest, I think I was just busy living my life, as I had for so many years. I didn't question whether or not I felt fulfilled. I didn't ask myself if there was something else, something different that I could do, something that might give me more meaning to my daily life. I was comfortable working with children in a school where everyone knew me, where my role and my identity were completely clear. I think I would have been afraid to take the risk, give up my regular paycheck, start a business, risk people's judgment, etc., any earlier than I did. Even when my time came, and I did decide to truly follow my heart and commit myself to this area of work, I was apprehensive. I had 2 children just beginning university, and I genuinely wondered if I could make this work, if I would even be any good at it. Here is what I know. The journey, which for me really began 16 years ago with my husband's cancer diagnosis, has been one of self-discovery. I still volunteer at hospice every week, and I feel honored to companion the residents there. I have learned to acknowledge and accept my limitations and to ask for help. I have learned that some business relationships are not productive. I have learned the necessity of supportive relationships. I have learned that I can do hard things. We can do hard things. It's never too late to give up on an old dream or even to create a new one. Our dreams can evolve and change just like we do. I think the key is to trust your gut instinct. Trust that you can be the person you feel you are meant to be. And then be prepared to work really, really hard to learn whatever new skills you will need. It's important to accept that it may not be an easy road, but know that it will be worthwhile in the end. If you believe in yourself, you're already halfway there. If you are lucky enough to have the love and support of somebody special to you, you are more than halfway there. I would like to leave you today with the words of Martin Luther King. You don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step. Thank you.